Welcome to Truly Terrified, Paranormal versus Physics, where we talk about some really weird stuff, and Joe the scientist explains how it's not possible, or maybe it is. I'm Lynn, and...
I'm Joe.
Okay, so in our last episode about the grave in our backyard, we mentioned that we found its location using dowsing rods. They're sometimes called witching sticks. I kept saying dowsing rods, and that's like douse with water, and that's the wrong term. It's dowsing rods. D-O-W-S-I-N-G.
I always thought it was dowsing.
Yeah, me too. So I have experience with them because a few years back I worked for a guy who did electric work on dairy farms. There were often no reliable records of where the wires were buried or where they went. And we do this time-consuming thing where he'd check the resistance, I think I'm using that word correctly, on a wire to see where it connected. So it's resistance, is that right?
I think so.
But that didn't help when he needed to know where the wire was actually at under the ground. He told me that another electrician, a guy he knew, found wires and other things under the ground using dowsing rods. I thought that sounded pretty cool. So I made some. And the next time we went out to a farm, I tried them out. And I found wires and pipes and cisterns and old plows and implements and all sorts of things.
So it worked.
It worked. It worked really well. Now, I have to say, though, there may have been crap all under the ground everywhere.
Yeah, it could be that even if you just randomly chose a spot, you'd find
and say,
something.
Dig there, and then you'd find a wire or a pipe or an old plow or whatever. But because I was able to do that, and that seemed to be pretty successful, pretty soon it was a regular thing I was doing on those dairies. So back to the grave. While we were wondering if there was really a grave under the ground in our yard near that headstone, I decided to try dowsing for it. My original rods are up in Wisconsin right now, so I quickly made some out of coat hangers, wire coat hangers, and plastic drinking straws, and I went out to the headstone, and I got a reaction immediately, but it was to the right of the headstone, not over or at the headstone, and that surprised me. I just kept moving around the headstone, but I didn't get a hit over it, only a little ways away from it. So I went and got Christina and handed her the rods, and she immediately had a huge reaction, but it wasn't over the stone. It was where I'd been standing, and I was getting a hit to the right of the stone. That's where she got this big reaction, and it was pretty dramatic. There was a definite attraction to the rods about 4 feet away from the headstone and in a rectangle perpendicular to it. So it was not where we expected to find it. When Ron came home from work, we told him about this, and he thinks we're nuts anyway, and he thinks we're witches. But he grabbed a shovel and he ran out there. Well, he didn't run, he walked, but he went out there and he started kind of digging around a little bit. And he hit concrete about 8 inches down in the spot where Christina had gotten the hit. He also tried over by the headstone and there was nothing. He didn't dig under the headstone, but around it, and he got nothing. But about, however far away from that, about 3 or 4 feet, where Christina had gotten the good hit, about 8 inches deep in the ground, he found concrete. Although he didn't dig and uncover the entire area, he would dig in one spot and then move over and dig in another spot. So he was kind of like doing, maybe not a grid, but, pretty close to it, of just kind of testing the ground, and determined that there was a slab of concrete that was about 3 feet wide by 6 to 8 feet long. And it wasn't ordinary concrete. It was roughly, just like hastily poured concrete because it was bumpy on top. It hadn't been smoothed out. And when he hit the shovel on it, sounded hollow underneath. And I was standing, well, now I know I was standing over the concrete. I didn't realize it at that time. And I could actually feel it in my feet when he hit the concrete. That was right where Christina had gotten her reaction with the dowsing rods. So that's pretty remarkable. We haven't, just a disclaimer, we haven't dug deeper to find out if there is really a man named Frank buried in our yard. But the rods showed something was there. And something was there. It could have just been hitting on the concrete, but maybe...
So wait a second. If it was a glass box, like it wasn't concrete, it was glass, would the rods work?
Well, I had always assumed it had to be water or metal. That's what I always assumed. But as we'll find out later, yeah, it would.
Okay, so if it was wood,
Yeah, it would.
so it works with anything.
Yeah.
It's goes by the intentions of the
Yeah.
user.
Yeah. So according to an Oxford PhD student, most of the major water companies in the United Kingdom use dowsing rods to find underwater pipes.
And it works.
And it works. One company said, quote, they are only used to detect pipework and voids that may be caused by bursts or collapses. Now, they had a thing on there, a disclaimer on there. To be clear, they said, dowsing is folklore and the practice is discredited by science. End quote.
Well, okay, so it shouldn't. So either it doesn't work. I mean, or this is what I'll say. Either you get hits off of the dowsing rods at the same rate as you would get hits just randomly walking around and picking random locations. If it works, it would be better than that. You'd get a hits for true positives more often than getting incorrect results.
Well,
But if they're studying in a lab, they should see that.
I just want to say that you also have to take into consideration the skill or the talent or the gift of the operator. So if somebody does not have that talent or skill or gift to be able to say, I think that this is where that pipe is, then whether they have dowsing rods or not, they're not going to get anything. And if they have that skill or talent or gift, maybe they don't need dowsing rods. But as with most things with human beings, we rely on a lot of different crutches to tell us whether or not we can do something. So that I don't find that surprising. I did think it was surprising, though, that major utility companies in the UK use dowsers.
I mean, it's like this. Let's say you had a group that was studying some paranormal phenomena, and they just went through it with millions of people. Absolutely not. They're not performing better than chance or whatever. It's like telepathy or dowsing or whatever, and they're not performing better than chance. And then they find somebody who, no matter what, performs slightly better than chance. So they test that person. That correlation either goes away, or that is a positive result. Mm-hmm. Even if it's one person in a billion people,
right?
And it's just 10% better or whatever. So if a group has studied this, yes, and they found anything,
yes, okay. So I will tell you about a study in a minute. So dowsing, also called witching or water witching, refers to the act of using two L-shaped instruments, one in each hand, in an attempt to discover the position of something. This explanation says underground, but as we'll find out later, it does not have to be underground. It can be anywhere in the world. That something can range from water to underground utilities and sometimes even extend to hidden archaeological structures. Dowsing rods can take the form of something as simple as two bent coat hangers, as I did, or something that's been purposely built because you can buy them already made. Y-shaped dowsing rods, which is what you usually see in old movies where they show some old geezer dowsing for water, and he's got like a stick that's Y-shaped and he holds on to the Y ends of the stick, and then the tail of the stick is sticking out, and he walks around and it'll go boing down towards where the water is, and then they dig and they get a well. Most people nowadays don't do that. So the L-shaped style or variant is most commonly made of metal, like a coat hanger or a wire, or if you were making it out of something else, you'd probably make it out of metal. So this is what they said, and as you'll remember from the other night when we were playing around with it, this is not what we were doing, and this is not how I do it. This said, dowsing rods work on a simple yes-no mechanic. For some dowsers, the rods turn inward, like towards the middle, to indicate you're above the object you're seeking, and out towards your shoulders to indicate that you are not above the place where you're seeking.
Mm-hmm.
But other people like me, it might go down, it might go that way, it, you know, to the right or the left. It does something, and it's something that I have probably predetermined in my mind that that's what it does when it hits on something. And when Christina did it, it was remarkably, like, sharply to the right, because she'd been standing there near the grave, and it was sharply to the right and actually even pulled downward. When we were doing it in the kitchen, you know, we were looking for any reaction. And then we said, if it's yes, it goes in the middle. If it's no, it goes outward. So that's kind of the background of what they are now, currently in our society, our world. But in the 16th century, well, no, even before that, the origins of dowsing trace back as far as the Greeks in the mid-5th century. I'm probably going to mangle this. I looked up the pronunciation. I have always said it wrong in my head, so I think I'm saying it right. Herodotus.
No clue.
Herodotus. Herodotus. That's what it says on the internet that you pronounce it like. I have always said something else, and I don't even know what it was now because I've said it so many different ways in my head. So Herodotus reported the use of wooden, Y-shaped forks for finding water. That was a common way to find water in the mid-5th century. By the 16th century, Georgius Agricola, a German mineralogist and a writer, recorded dowsing rods being used to find metal ore deposits. In the 1980s, a large-scale experiment was conducted in Germany with over 500 self-proclaimed dowsers. In a large 2-story barn, a pipe filled with water was put on the lower level, and they put the dowsers on the top level.
Mm-hmm.
So they'd move that pipe around, and the dowsers were supposed to find where the pipe was.
Mm-hmm.
The study's organizers, they determined that the experiment proved that dowsing worked. But other scientists scrutinized the study and said it proved the opposite. They said they'd picked out the few dowsers that had good success, and so the other participants, they discounted them. But as you said earlier, if even one person gets consistent success,
even just one, it's not like you're proving something for the whole population. You're proving that it is possible.
Right. It's like if you took 100 people and you said, draw a realistic drawing of this person here, and only one person was able to do it, would you say, well, you handpicked just this person who was really good? So, you know, obviously...
Yeah, but what you're trying to prove is that somebody could do it.
It's possible, right. So even though that study said, you know, the original organizers said it proved it worked, the people who looked at it later said, nah, it didn't work. But it doesn't even matter, because people have relied on dowsing for centuries, and they still do right now. So something must be going on.
So, I know that other studies where they're like studying whether somebody can read a number behind a wall or something. Mm-hmm. They're really, really careful to make sure that the person cannot get any information about the thing beforehand, during, or even after. So, with the barn thing, I could actually see, like, if you're walking around and you're getting very minute information from, like, the sound of your footsteps or whatever, or it was possible somehow to see it, I think it would probably take a much big, because you're looking for something really subtle.
Yeah.
It would take a lot to get really hardened results that you're sure about. But beyond like a slight statistical correlation, the people are using it because they think because it's useful.
Right.
So like for instance, if some dowser who knew it was useful was skeptical and said, maybe I could just walk around and pick a spot, whatever feels good, or what would feel the same spot as a positive dowsing result. And so they're walking around and they pick it out. And if that's useful, then they don't actually need the rods.
Right.
And if it's like, okay, I'm going to actively try not to pick this same, get the same results, and they're successful with that's pretty good. You're pretty sure that you can differentiate.
Are you saying like they walk around and they say, okay, I'm going to pick a spot that does not have any pipes.
Water or any pipes or whatever.
Yeah.
And if you do it, then that means you can pick and choose at a later point. It's actually useful. It's not just like fooling yourself. It really is useful.
Well, I think that the UK utility companies that are using dowsing to find underground pipes must be more than just coincidence or whatever. Even if those people are picking up other subtle cues, there's a lot of infrastructure under the ground, and presumably in the UK like there is in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has to have some value to them, or else they wouldn't be doing it. They wouldn't be wasting their time. They wouldn't be subjecting themselves to ridicule.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that even though maybe a scientific study hasn't been done, that is sort of a study that it seems to work. And there's lots of other stories of people who have used dowsers, hired them, knew them, or did it themselves with success.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something going on there. What it is, who knows? But I will say this. So I looked up what like psychiatrists or psychologists or scientists believe is going on.
Mm-hmm.
Because of course they're going to be skeptical that it's anything metaphysical.
Yeah.
And
which I should add, that's the wrong way to look at it. The better way to look at it is to be completely neutral and say, if there is something here that's surprising, then it's worth investigating. And if you find something that definitively this is how this is working, then you update your model of reality.
Right.
Really, there's no other way to do it.
Okay.
Otherwise, you're biasing yourself away from reality.
Yeah. So this is what they say. The conventional belief is this. In essence, they say beyond any metaphysical intervention, dowsing success can be attributed to something called the ideomotor effect. No, the success can't be attributed to that. The effect can be attributed to that. The fact that the rods are moving can be attributed to ideomotor
that is
effect.
That is something happening in your brain affecting your...
Well, it's little tiny movements. It's the same reason why a Ouija board works. Little tiny movements that you're not even aware of, and you aren't...
So it's like subconscious movements.
Yes, and so you're moving it without even realizing. Like you said, when we were holding them the other night, you said, well, if you tilt your hand, it'll swing.
Yeah, so if you tilt your hands away from each other...
Right, and then it's going to swing outward.
If your thumb is up and you tilt them away, the rods swing out very quickly.
So the ideomotor effect, absolutely, I believe, is what is causing the rods to move. But what is causing...
Yeah, so it's worth noting that if it wasn't that, there would be an anomalous force coming from somewhere else.
Yeah.
It almost certainly, like this is in the realm of like telepathy, where it's all, whatever anomalous exotic thing is happening is in your head, and it's just affecting how you move.
Right. So they say that it's unconscious and involuntary movements that are occurring because of your prior experience or suggestions or expectations. Priming or thinking of emotion can cause muscle movements, and that can explain why they move without any perceived directed effort on the part of the person holding them. But it can't explain, and that's why I say it is not attributing, You can't attribute success to that. You can attribute the movement to that, but the success, that's something else is going on.
The cause of the success
Is something,
not the movement.
something else. So in the case of the utility locating, experience and prior knowledge of infrastructure could influence the technician's ability to determine and interpret a utility's underground position. Above ground visual cues, prior visits to the site, any other aspects of the job experience could lead to the development of a more innate understanding of where the utility infrastructure could be. Without realizing it, the technician might move the dowsing rods during their search for utilities. It still can explain why, holding those rods in their hands, some people are able to find those underground pipes.
It's also worth saying that even if they're just accessing some subconscious knowledge that they have,
it's still valuable.
That is still valuable.
Right. It is still
100%. I think my sense is that if it was anything, I mean, that's fairly exotic. If it was anything exotic, it would be that. That you know something, you are feeling something, you're you feel like maybe a sponginess to the ground when you're looking for water, or like you actually sense a change in static electricity when you're looking for wires.
Or you remember something somebody mentioned 10 years ago that you've totally forgot about when they were trenching for this pipe or whatever. Whatever that is. But it's the ideomotor effect is something else is going on in your brain, and that is causing the ideomotor effect. The ideomotor effect is not causing success. Something else is causing the success. And they also said that confirmation bias is directing it. So if you believe water is here, you're out there with your dowsing sticks, and it says it hits on there being water there, and then lo and behold, there's water there, and you say, oh, the dowsing sticks told me, but in fact, before you even started, you believe there was water there.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, I get that. That could be confirmation bias. But if it's something that you have no knowledge of, like where is the grave in the yard? In other words, the only possible source of knowledge is what you're experiencing for the first time. Right. So I believe that the answer is actually that you are having some sort of communication, not even communication. You've tuned into a radio signal that's telling you something that most people are not hearing, that they're not knowing that, and you're allowing the sticks to indicate to you what you're picking up. And I think that's all it is. And you think that is within the realm of everyday source of information, like the sponginess of the ground. It could be partially that. It could be something else. Christina, maybe she was picking up the fact that there was a hump of dirt there, and maybe when she walked across it, she felt the hollowness of it. Yes, I agree that is possible. But next episode, I have some stories to tell that really will kind of shoot that one down, because these stories blew my mind. And I really want to do more experiments with the dowsing rods, because I think that I have not given them enough of a chance to go above and beyond finding graves or pipes or wires in the ground. There's much more it can do. Do you want to add anything else about a dowsing? Dowsing before I gather information for the next episode. What do they have to be made of? Anything? They don't have, I don't think they have to be made of anything. I think that... Do they have to be sticks? I think they're just a tool. For instance, could you hold like a ball in your fingers loosely, and when it falls, that's the place? Yeah. I think it's just a tool. Could you like carefully like hold your finger on a button on a smartphone, and when your finger moves, twitches, that's the spot? I think so. I mean, presumably you would have to try it. And I think it's just a tool for being able to communicate what your mind is picking up, either from circumstances or from some other source. Okay, yeah. The other stuff
I want to ask, we'll have to wait because it's related to the more exotic interpretations.
Okay. But before I end, I have to make some remarks because these are notes on previous episodes.
Uh-huh.
So on death certificates in our episode about about the grave, we were talking about death certificates and finding a grave in your yard, and can you find the death certificate, and you can't find the death certificate, blah 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 blah. So I mentioned death certificates, and this is what I looked up. The U.S. Bureau of Census developed the first standard certificates for the registration of vital events, births and deaths in, you want to take a guess what year?
1970.
No, come on. I have a birth certificate.
Oh, yeah. Birth certificates, yeah, I suppose.
1900.
Oh, okay.
1900. Before that, death certificates weren't registered, and other than census or church records, they weren't even recorded.
In the U.S.?
In the U.S. I don't know what was going on elsewhere.
Okay.
But they did record births and deaths and marriages in church records, in sometimes town records, medical records. You know, there were lots of different ways.
Standardized it.
So when you do genealogical research, you aren't going to find death certificates from a long time ago. You will find them more recently if they're made public. You won't find them from a long time ago, like death certificates that we understand what they are, which is a formalized thing where there's a cause of death and, you know, all that information. But you will find church records, census records, town hall records. They also used to have gazettes that different towns would put out that told, you know, who all lived in the town and what their occupation was and where they lived. And those records, from one year to the next, that person is no longer listed, but it lists the other family members. You can probably guess that they died in the interim. So that, I wanted to clarify that the death records are not something that's always been around. It hasn't. The other thing was, I mentioned a famous YouTuber. I'm so ashamed of this. And I said she was a mortician, but I couldn't think of her name. Her name is Caitlin Doty. She's the funeral director, and she has a YouTube channel called Ask a Mortician. And I am so sorry to Caitlin Doty for forgetting her name. She is a very well-known YouTuber, very well-known proponent of family-led and natural funerals and people being able to direct how they want to be buried and how they want their burial to go, because she mainly does education about you don't need to have a coffin, you don't need to be embalmed, you know, all that stuff. So I wanted to make sure that I got that in there. Thank you, listeners, for coming along for this ride. Our contact information is in the show notes. You can email us, text us, or even call us and leave a 3-minute voicemail. And as always, if you have a story you want to tell, send it to us. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and never be so terrified you can't run.